on behalf of IISER Pune, welcome you to this very special event of IISER Pune's Month of Jazz. Today, we are going to be treated to a spectacular fusion of jazz and Indian classical dance that will most definitely enthrall us all. Now it's time to introduce our main guest for today, Mr. George Brooks. Mr. Brooks is a saxophonist composer with an incredibly diverse repertoire, who is highly acclaimed for having successfully bridged the gap between jazz and Indian classical music, while managing to retain the beauty of both. Over the years, he has released a lot of music with several great Indian classical musicians, including Zakir Hussain, Shankar Mahadevan, L. Subramaniam, Kadri Gopal Nath, Shujat Khan, Hariprasad Chaurasia, and many others. George Brooks was introduced to Indian classical music during his time at the New England Conservatory of Music and has since then been mesmerized by it. Initially, he received training under the great Pandit Pran Nath in India and then went back home to the United States, where he began to experiment with fusion. He has toured around the world extensively, doing concerts with the likes of Terry Riley, Etta James, and many others. He was part of John McLaughlin's Floating Point, which was nominated for a Grammy Award. Today, George Brooks is one of the most recognizable names on the international jazz scene. Tonight, Mr. Brooks will be accompanied by a rather non-traditional percussion. In this experimental form of music, his jazz melodies will be complemented by the rhythm of Kathak, performed by our second guest of the night, Rujuta Soman. Rujuta ji is one of the leading Kathak artists of the country and studied under the tutelage of late Pandita Dr. Rohini Bhate. She has also worked under the guidance of Pandit Suresh Talwarkar and Pandit Rajendra Gangani. As the leader of the Rujuta Soman Cultural Academy, she has toured around the country and the world, mesmerizing her audience wherever she goes. She has been bestowed with many honors and titles, like the Nritya Alankar by Akhil Bharatiya Gandharva Mahavidyalaya, the Singar Mani by Sur Singar Samsad. Just this January, Rujuta ji has been awarded the Shri Nandini Award for outstanding contribution in the field of dance by the Fifth Note Academy. Also accompanying on the cajon is Umesh Varbhavan, a student of Tal Yogi Pandit Suresh Talwarkar. Without further ado, let me hand over the stage to tonight's artists, Mr. George Brooks, Rujuta Soman, and Umesh Varbhavan.
Well, it's wonderful to see so many of you. Start by telling you just a little bit about my journey, how somebody with a saxophone winds up on stage with a Kathak dancer. I mean, it's a pretty unusual thing, and I've been very fortunate just that certain things that have captured my interest as a musician have also been established as my pathway in life, really for the last 35, 40 years. Yeah, I was, without revealing anything, I was about 19 when I first heard Indian classical music. I picked up the saxophone, and these are both saxophones, by the way. A lot of people think this is a clarinet, but this is a soprano saxophone, which is kind of like the baby of the saxophone family. This is a tenor saxophone. And there's one in between that especially you hear pretty prominent in early Bollywood films, which is the alto saxophone, which is kind of in between these two in size. That's the instrument that I started on when I was 10 years old. So I've been playing the saxophone a long time. And in those days, where I grew up in New York, everybody, once they turned 10 years old in our fourth grade or fourth standard, there was a school band, and you got to choose an instrument. And I wanted to play drums, but my mother was terrified. So she said, no, please pick up, and my apologies, she said, please play a musical instrument first. And she didn't realize how loud the saxophone was. I think she may have regretted her choice. But I started playing when I was like 10 years old, and even before that, was very interested in singing. I did not grow up in a musical family, which is quite different from most Indian musicians I know, or many of them certainly came up with their fathers, grandfathers, grandmothers. You know, it's often a family thing. But I kind of came to it on my own. I liked being on stage. I acted as a little kid before I got involved in the saxophone. But I played it. Had an aptitude for it, so I played in the school band. I played in the school orchestra. I learned to read music. But I imagined that I was going to be a doctor, and I went off to college, pre-med. But while I was in school, I started playing in bands professionally, playing kind of like dance music. This was in the 70s, so R&B, funk, that kind of thing, and learning to play jazz. I should backtrack a little bit. When I was about 14, I'd been listening to the Beatles, I'd been listening to Jethro Tull and kind of the pop music of the time. But when I grew up just outside of New York City, and when I was about 14, I was able to get into jazz clubs. At that time, the drinking age and the legal age for going to a club was 18, but they weren't very strict about it. So I was able to go hear some of, the real stalwarts, the real giants of jazz who are still alive, people like Sonny Rollins. They're kind of like our, they're our Bari Ghulam Ali Khans and these great stalwarts of music, who I was able to go hear as a teenager. And I started trying to figure things out, but I didn't have a very good teacher. I went off to school pre-med, started playing in these dance bands, and started learning a little bit about the theory of music at the keyboard. And I decided I wanted to make a go for it. Again, my mother wasn't happy, but I wound up returning to New York, studying with a great jazz saxophone player who had played with the Count Basie Band, if that means anything to some jazz listeners. And then auditioned for and got accepted to a school called the New England Conservatory of Music, which is a music conservatory that by American standards is quite old, established it sometime in the 1800s, and was one of the first classical conservatories to also offer a jazz program. Now, that's very common in universities and city colleges, in junior high schools and high schools. Jazz has kind of permeated music education, and in many ways it's a great thing. Jazz musicians have to be very knowledgeable about harmony. They're really, like classical musicians, they read the notes that are in front of them, and many of them, I don't want to take anything away, they're brilliant, but often they don't actually understand what's happening harmonically, what's the underlying theory behind the music. A jazz musician kind of has to know that in order to improvise over what we call chord changes or changing chords. So while I was a student at the conservatory, hoping to be playing bebop and jazz, I had an elective. I had to take all these required courses, but there was one elective, and I saw something called A Survey of Indian Classical Music. And just on a whim, I took that course. I didn't know anything about it. I'd heard a little bit of Ravi Shankar on the Concert for Bangladesh that George Harrison had produced to raise funds for the terrible famine that happened in the 70s. But honestly, when that part came on, I was like, this is weird. I don't know what, this doesn't make sense to me. But when I went to that class, which was being taught by an American, but a sitarist named Peter Rowe, who had lived for, 6 or 7 years prior to his coming back to the States. I think he went to Banaras Hindu University, studied with Nikhil Banerjee, who I'm sure, if you're fans of classical music, you know. And the school had a listening room in those days. It was records, big black CDs, and I would go down, put on the headphones, and the first things I heard just really blew my mind. I guess I was at that moment sort of ready for it, and I was listening to the really old classical masters. I was listening to the Dagger brothers singing Drupad. I was listening to Ram Narayan, V.G. Jog, Ali Akbar Khan. And I was just like, wow, when I'm here, my sort of guru of the saxophone, or really one of the celestial stars, is a man named John Coltrane, a name that some of you might know. So he was both a absolutely brilliant technician, brilliant theorist, spiritual seeker. And what I heard in his music, what really attracted me to the music of John Coltrane, was also what I was hearing in this Indian classical music. And I really liked, the heavy alaps and the deep expression of raga. That's what I was really drawn to. So I started trying to figure out how to do something with that on my instrument. Once again, people were not pleased. I mean, it was something that the jazz teachers at the conservatory thought was really odd, really thought that they didn't understand what somebody who was supposedly studying jazz was doing, exploring raga. One of the main reasons, and the big difference between jazz and Indian classical music, is that a classical Indian performance of music will take place within one scale, one small series of notes and you may not use any other notes for an hour and a half, let's say, especially in a traditional classical performance. I just played with Hari Prasad Chaurasia a couple of nights ago down in Bangalore, and we played Rag Hansadwani. Are people familiar with? It's a five note scale. For me, very beautiful, very evocative, very emotional. But for most jazz musicians to play five notes for an hour, seriously, they would just go like, what am I doing? How can I keep doing it? And the first time I heard Hariji play in California, first time I heard him play live, he played Bhupali, which is another different five-note scale. Just was amazed that he could play those five notes for an hour and a half, and it felt like he never repeated a single phrase. There was so much inventiveness in that. So something about my aesthetic, my tendencies, makes me very comfortable exploring the power within a small number of notes. I liked the drone. I liked that very strong relationship of one note to another that you can really only explore through a lop, through slow expression of tones, really listening to the colors within each note. And this is what Hariji kind of blew my mind with also. He would play one note, and within that note, you could actually kind of hear the whole raga being expressed. So, I was at New England Conservatory, listening to Indian classical music, trying to figure it out. At that time, a young woman floated through my life in Boston, and then she moved to California. I graduated, I followed her out to California. And Northern California was a center of Indian classical music in the West. Ali Akbar Khan had established a college. Raise your hand if you know who Ali Akbar Khan is. Okay, that's good. That's heartening. So this great Sarod maestro had established a school of Indian classical music in Berkeley, California first, and then in Marin County, which is just nearby. And so he was there. It attracted people like Zakir Hussain, Pandit Nikhil Banerjee, and somebody who's going to become very important in my life, a sitarist named Krishna Bhatt, who's not as well known as his uncle Vishwa Mohan Bhatt, the slide guitar player who's Padma Bhushan and is very prominent player. So I happened to, let me go back just a little bit. So I chased this woman out to California. I caught her. And she was just finishing her education at a college there where this great Indian vocalist from the Karana Gharana named Pandit Pranath was teaching. My wife, Emily, she wasn't yet my wife, revealing some secrets, but she got a fellowship to study in India, and she took me with her. And we wound up living in New Delhi for 10 months. We actually got married there. And she introduced me to her Guruji, Pandit Pranath, and we became very, very close, which was kind of amazing. In a way, when he was in the West, when he was very, people were sort of afraid of him because he was very austere. He was born in 1918, but he was, even for being born at that time, he was old-fashioned. You know, he was, you know, from really a different time and place. But as I'd mentioned, I was pre-med when I went to college. He had had a heart attack about a year prior, and he liked the fact that I had a small amount of medical knowledge. I also cook really well, and he had to have a diet that was free of salt, which is almost impossible to find in India, as you know. And so I could cook for him. I could do massage, which is required of a shisha, learning, you know, from their guru. I could cook. I had a tiny bit of medical knowledge, and I could massage. So I was like in pretty well. And he started teaching me. You know, I was never expecting to sing, and I don't really sing very well. And the story, which is kind of humorous, I was also, you know, kind of in awe of him because he was a very stern man. And he asked me to accompany him to Shirdi. He's a devotee of Sai Baba. And I went to Mumbai ahead of him and was staying in some hostel there, 25 rupees a night, on a little charpai. And I had booked him a room in a hotel, and this is Mumbai in 1980, so then Bombay, and really different, kind of like a small town, sort of, then. Anyway, he came and said, "Show me where you're staying." I said, "I'm staying here." And he said, "How much does that cost?" I said, 25 rupees a night. And I booked him in a hotel. He was like, "How much is the hotel?" I said, "That's 250 rupees, you know." He was like, "That's fine, I'll stay here with you." And I'm like, "But Guruji, there's one charpai. This is no problem, this is India." So there I am sleeping in this charpai next to my Guruji. Wakes me up at 4 in the morning. "Are bhai, chai lao." I'm like, it's like 4 o'clock in the morning. Where am I going to find chai? And he's just like, you know, bahar jao. So I go out. And of course, as soon as I walk out onto the street, some little boy is there, "Chai?" And get a couple of cups of chai, go up, and he goes, "Okay, courage karo, sing." Sa. I'm like, so we started singing, and he was like, "What's in the box?" And I'm like, "Oh, that's my saxophone." He goes, "Let me play that." And he goes, "Okay, that's what you do." So, although I studied singing with him, we went and got tamboras built, and, you know, I did a lot of sa and pa and voice, as he called it, voice culture, and learning, you know, really learning about what is the essence of raga, what does raga mean. And I wasn't looking at intricate rhythms, I was really looking at the notes and the relationship of the notes. I came back to California after a year there, met Krishna Bhatt, great sitar player from a Jaipur family, Senia Gharana, whose father, Shashi Mohan Bhatt and Vishwa Mohan Bhatt, and many, many Bhatts everywhere, all musicians. And he and I started playing together. Pandit Pranath, my Guruji from Delhi, was also teaching in California maybe half the year. So he was there, and one of his disciples, very great American composer pianist named Terry Riley, who had incorporated, really one of the first to incorporate some of the ideas of Indian classical music into contemporary Western composition. So I started playing with Terry Riley, I started playing with Krishna Bhatt. Often we would play as a trio. Terry was already pretty famous, so we would tour in Europe and tour, and I started, you know, I was given kind of an entry into a pretty high level of musical world. At the same time, I had still studied jazz, I knew how to play jazz, and I became involved with some very famous blues artists. And so I was dividing my time touring with Terry Riley, playing sort of Indian fusion and playing blues. And I continued to kind of walk these two pathways, which was unusual. And at the time was trying to work on myself as a composer. I really felt that I didn't have a clear sense of my voice as an artist. I knew I wanted to do something that was, I guess, distinctly mine, but I wasn't sure what it was, and I kept developing. And when I was quite old by sort of certain standards, when I was 40 and having my third child, but maintaining my figure, I felt that I was mature enough as a composer to make my first recording, and I did it with Krishna Bhatt, who then introduced me to Zakir Hussain. And Zakir said, well, why don't I play on the album? And I was like, are you serious? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, can I afford you? And he was like, don't worry about that. Let's deal with the music. So I recorded my first recording with Zakir, and he had a record label called Moment Records, and he put out my first recording on that record label. And I have to say, being presented to the world of Indian music by Zakir Hussain is advantageous. And you know, I made a subsequent album just a couple of years later. Ashish Khan played on it, Sultan Khan played on it, and then right after that, I guess I came to Hariji's attention, and I did a concert with Hariji and Viku Vinayak Ram, and suddenly a lot of doors opened for me. And because I was, I think, truly invested in the music and really cared about it, I was, you know, I was accepted and given a lot of instruction by these master musicians, sitting with Sultan Khan, sitting with Ashish Khan, sitting with Krishna Bhatt, Vikuji, Zakir Bhai. A lot of wonderful musical information was given to me. So I'll skip ahead. 2004, I received a grant to come to Pune. And, oh no, I'll go back one step. Sometime, maybe around 2001, 2002, I came to Pune, and this is my first trip to Pune, and to play with Zakir. Outside, there's a big fort somewhere, and there was a big concert set up. I played with Zakir, his brother Tawfiq, and Sultan Khan. And in the front row was Shamabate, people are familiar, wonderful Kathak dancer, and her students. And we played a composition of mine called McCoy. I'll play a little bit of it. And it's an interesting piece. It's actually in some ways become one of my most well-known pieces within the sort of Indian instrument community. A lot of Indian artists have learned this piece because it fits well within the like a raga context, and it's kind of rhythmically exciting. So I'll play a little bit of it for you. And for those of you who like to count, it's in 3, which also could be considered 12, which also could be considered 24, and it opens with a phrase that you could think of as being divided in 11 and 13. And I know this is a science school, so what does that equal? 24, which can be divided by 12 or 3. So it begins with this phrase that goes like this. Okay, that's the if you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay? And then the melody goes on like this. 3, Okay, so I played that piece, and in the front row, all these people were going like, oh my God, he's playing that piece. And I was like, so after the concert, a bunch of these people came up to me and said, you played McCoy. I'm like, how do you know that piece? And the title of that tune is McCoy. It's dedicated to a great American jazz pianist named McCoy Tyner, who used to play with John Coltrane, who I told you is our god of the saxophone. It turns out that somebody in Austria had a copy of that CD. They liked the music. And Suresh Talwalkar, you familiar with him? Great rhythm genius who lives here in Pune, or between here and Mumbai. So he and his rhythm student, Shamabate, Kathak teacher, Kathak dancer, they were doing some teaching, I think, at a conservatory in Austria, and they did an exchange program, and they had choreographed, unbeknownst to me, a whole Kathak extravaganza to this composition. And they'd made an arrangement of it, and they had a group of Austrian musicians and Indian artists who went up to Austria. So they were like really thrilled that they got to hear me play this piece. And they brought me back to their Gurukul. I had a day off, so I went to the Gurukul and got to know them. And we established this idea that we would get together and try to work on some sort of Kathak dance and my music and Kathak. And I came, and a couple of years later, I got this grant, and I came and spent 2 weeks here working with Shamatai and her students. And then later, one of her students came to the U.S., got an Indian Fulbright to study with us. So I've actually learned a lot from Kathak dancers. There's, I think, a lot about the way they think about about rhythm fits in well with the way I can think about it. And I think because dancers, tabla, they've got 10 fingers going. Things are so complex and so fast that it doesn't quite translate well to what I can do on the saxophone. But dance, it's just 2 feet. So there's kind of the way things get divided up and thought about really works for me. So I learned a lot here in Pune, and how did I come here today? So Sudipto had, through the wonders of Facebook, had contacted me, and by chance, we just sort of chatted. He's like, I'd like to do something sometime, and then very shortly after he contacted me, I got a call, can you come to Bangalore to play with Hari Prasad Charasi? And I was like, yeah. I mean, not only yeah, but yes. And so I wrote a few people and said, look, if I'm going to come all the way to India, I usually like to not do just one thing, because from California, it's a really long trip. So I wrote to a few people, and Sudipta said, well, there's some people I'd like you to meet, and one of them is Rujuta. And can you come to Pune, do a workshop, do a demonstration? And so I said, yes, that sounds like a wonderful idea. So here I am, here we are. We just met, we just got together, but we clearly have an artistic affinity already. And we spent a little time rehearsing yesterday. And as you can see, this is a bit of an unusual ensemble. This is not typical for anybody. I'm sure Rujuta usually has 1 or 2 drummers and somebody playing either harmonium or bansuri or sitar. And for me, I usually have somebody playing a keyboard, generally a percussionist and a bass player. But we've decided to explore one of my compositions for you. And I think we're ready to play. Have you heard enough of my story? Did I leave anything out? Do you want to ask? You can have like 2 minutes for questions. Anybody want to ask something, or you want me to just get into the music? Okay, we'll do the music. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna perform this composition, And then we're going to kind of explain a little bit how we put it together and what's happening. Okay. Rujuta. No. Hey. So what'd you think? Nice? Interesting? Unusual for a Kathak saxophone combination. So the piece is called Spice, actually, a composition of mine from an album called Spirit and Spice. She's leaving. Come back. I scared her. So we wanted to kind of explain how we put the piece together. It's a little complicated, the piece. It's in an 11-beat cycle, which is unusual for us and unusual. Do you want to say something? What you first? How this was for you?
Well, I was excited, and at the same time, it was a pressure, and it was a tension how I will collaborate, because very first time I'm working with the jazz, and when we met yesterday for the first time, actually we came together with a melody only, and his melody inspires so much. Being a dancer, actually melody inspires us a lot. And then we went into the rhythm, and actually it was his concept to have dance as an accompaniment. And this was the thought that had come in my mind a few years back, why dance cannot be as a accompanying element. And that actually came into actual, like, I'm here as an accompaniment, and I'm understanding the rhythm. And it's amazing how he looks at the rhythm cycle in different ways. And actually, we are interacting him since yesterday in the morning, and he's teaching us and also sharing with us what he has done with a 7.5, with a 11, 11, 11, 12. And it comes, melody comes first, and then he goes to the rhythm. That was, he was sharing with us. So
So this piece, the opening part, which, actually we didn't meet yesterday morning. I didn't arrive here till like 5 o'clock at night. So it felt like we've been together for a long time, but it's really been extremely brief. And actually, this piece that we just performed is not the one that we rehearsed first. So, but it's interesting, so everything is in 11, in some form of 11. So the opening section, which I played, that's one cycle of 11. And that one, again, I heard the melody, and then I went, wait, what's going on? Oh, it's 11. And wait, how's it 11? Oh, it's 3, 3, 3, and 2. So that's kind of the feeling of the melody. That's the full melody, which is actually 5 cycles of 11. It's a 55-beat melody, which, if you were trying to count, would be impossible. But the melody is very catchy, if I might say. It's very memorable. So it's kind of easy to feel where you are. So what Rujuta was doing first was just keeping this 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. And then but one of the, and that was nice. That was sort of our idea of, okay, you're going to accompany me. But one of the things I love about Kathak and, art in general is this abhinaya, this expressive nature. And so I suggested that in this opening section we do that, which is what she did so beautifully there. So in some ways, that was our invocation. That was, you know, yeah.
Invocation to the space which we are using. So directions, space.
So, which is, you know, something I like to do in my music. It's like the alap, maybe, if you want to look at it that way. So that section ends, and I do some improvisation in there, mixing up, you know, the 3 becomes 6, and the 2 becomes 4. And then we go into the fast section, which stays in 11, but it's divided 3.5, 5.5. So what is that? It's divided as 9 and 13. Again, not because I thought of the numbers, but I thought of the melody first. So if you kept a straight 11, the second half of the melody is like all on the upbeats. It's like da 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 So doing the little halves make it easy. 1, 2, 3, taki to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, taki to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, yeah. Second melody there is more of a, shall we say, a traditional 11, where it's like slow 4 and a little 3, so 8 and 3 plus 8 and 3, so 4.5, 4.5. Is that right? Yes. 5.5, 5.5. 5.5, 5.5. 1, 2, 3, 4, statate, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5.5, 5.5. And then that last part of that melody is dit tonga dit tonga dit tonga dit dit taki to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, bang. That's 22 beats, which divided by 2 is awesome. Okay. That's why we do these things at science schools. But see, really, that's about the level of math that I can do. Once my kids started taking algebra, I was like, talk to your mom. Yeah. And yet my daughter became a math teacher. So, but I didn't get that gene, but I can add. I've got that 5, 5, 5, and 7 is 22. Divided by 2 is 11. And that's pretty, thank you. Perhaps there's a position here for me. So we did all that, and then we have to do something fancy. So we're digging, we're enjoying all that, and we get into the. So the fancy stuff is like a T-high, you know, you all know that word? Would you like to explain what a T-high is? A rhythmic phrase that happens 3 times?
It's very simple. Actually, I don't have to explain. Many good musicians and dancers are here present. The group of syllables we perform for 3 times with equal 2 gaps. 1, 2, 3 high.
A, B, B.
Yeah.
Okay, that was brilliant. So this phrase ends with a T, you know, it's kind of like a T-high, yeah, it is. And that phrase had been a 1 high, an ek high, and Vijay Gate, another one of your great star musicians from Pune, I was playing it with him, and he said, why don't you just do this to end it? I was like, yeah, very much so. So we'll slow that down as. So that's not a T high, but it's what I've done is it's like 6, 6, 6, 5, 5, 5, and again, what is 6 plus 5? 11, right? So again, I don't think of these things mathematically. I have the ideas, and then I have to kind of figure out what they are. And originally I just played. Because that's also 11. That's also 11, but it's not as graceful as doing it 3 times with the little gap, which is what my brother Vijay Gate showed me. So I incorporated that in. And then we get into sort of the open improvisation section, which is. I'm just showing you the outline of that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. But we go bang, kika, ba boo beep beep boom. So in the West they call that a hemiola when you're playing 4 against 3 like that. So our three becomes 4. A highly irrelevant word that no one needs to know, but. Play around with that and fill in the gaps and improvise, and we end that section with another T high. Simple one. And it's this one, instead of starting from 1, it begins and comes to 1 and then comes back around. So we play on that little, we've got our 4, 4, and then the T high begins on the 3. 2, 3. So the little takita is the B section, and the ba 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 is the A section. So we go ba 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 takita ba 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 takita ba 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 ba, And although I'm saying takita, which means three, it's actually really takitakita. So it's like ba ba baby takitakita ba 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 takitakita ba 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 ba. So once again, I got sixes and I got fives. So I know I'm doing well. And then we get into kind of a little bit. Again, we're still in 11, but it's in a much less rhythmic fashion, fashion, and it kind of enters another, maybe more expressive or Abhinaya type area, where I'm going. Which I don't really count. I just hear the melody, but I know that it's 5 and 6 and 6 and 5 somewhere. But that's the basic feeling. And then the final section is something that I really like, which to me evokes, the really one of the real differences things feeling-wise between classical Indian music and Western music is this idea of a rhythmic cycle. Western music sort of grooves in a forward motion, but Indian talas kind of have to come back to one. It's very important in the aesthetic and in the structure. So, and the other thing that's really important for me in my relationship to Indian music is the tambura, is the drone. And to me, it's one of the very sad things is that the tambura has now become an iPhone or another kind of electronic box, which is, it's great for practicing. It's really easy to carry on an airplane, but the tambura itself is actually like a brilliant piece of technology. It's actually kind of amazing. It's been around for a long time, and it does some things that really can't be replicated. It can sort of be replicated, but not very well by electronic or digital representations. And what happens, the genius of the tambura is you've got the strings, and since you're all scientists, you know that when a string vibrates, it creates some kind of sine wave. But then it also creates the upper partials of that sine wave, and these are dictated by nature. These are kind of like laws that you get something that's vibrating at 220 hertz, and then there's another vibration happening at 440. And then there's another one happening at a 3-to-2 ratio, which gives us the fifth. So we've got like... And that is the naturally occurring harmonic sequence. And that, because of this jawari, the shape of the bridge on a tambura, and these little threads... do you know, raise your hand if you don't know what a tambura is, really. Come on, really? How many of you have tuned a tambura? Raise your hand if you've tuned a tambura. Okay, great. That's like by itself an amazing musical practice. And you take these magic threads and you put them between the string and the jawari, the string and the bridge, and it creates a buzz. That gives the shimmering sound that lets you know you're listening to Indian music. It's this amazing thing. And those buzzes, if you start to listen closely, aren't just buzzes, but they are actual harmonic pitches. That's what we call just intonation. It's what we call the naturally occurring harmonics. Like, to me, because I've spent, maybe because of the way I'm wired, or because I've spent so much time with Indian music, a piano is an out-of-tune instrument. The piano, the intonation, the intervals have been adjusted so that we can play in 12 keys, which is fantastic. I love Western music, I love harmony. I spend all my time when I'm not playing the saxophone playing the piano. But some of the intervals are kind of ugly to my ear, and actually that's why we create the way of playing our voicings to kind of mask those out-of-tune, those sort of compromised intervals. Okay, now how did I get into this? Oh, the tambora. Okay, so the tambora, you're playing this cycle. And so I like in my music to have something cyclical that creates that sort of musical mandala, this somewhat hypnotic effect that comes from the tambora. So the end of this composition, when I have a full ensemble, is actually a number of these patterns happening at the same time. But because I'm playing a single note instrument, I can only play one at a time. We start with this one that goes. That's one cycle of 11. So that's, and on a keyboard, that effect maybe is more. It's 6, 5, 5, 6. So the pattern kind of creates a little mirror image of 11. And then we do the fancy stuff again, and the piece is over. So that's that. So now, does anybody have any questions, comments, criticisms? Nothing. Come on. Question? No question? Yeah? Yes.
How would how would we as classical dancers adapt to the jazz head? As he said, it just moves forward, it doesn't come back to the end.
Well, that's interesting because me being because I have both of these influences, I tend to think a little differently than your average jazz musician. But our pieces do have ends. So, but they're usually a little bit unstructured. Like, one of our really common forms is the blues, which is actually a little bit like a slow ectal. It's what we call a 12-bar form. It goes kind of like this. And that's one. Okay? So, how would you dance to it? I don't know. Should we see? Explain. No, I won't explain it to you because because the thing is, you can feel it in 4. It's just 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. And that is how you dance to the blues. So we speak a similar language. I mean, we've got rhythm. Yes.
I mean, it's very beautiful seeing this melange. I apologize that I have been hearing a lot of jazz, but I'm not an expert in jazz. And I've seen my daughter learn that. So I have a very innocent question, and a curiosity question to Rujuta first. That sum, the concept of sum is the prana of Kathak dance. So when you now dance to this form, did you see yourself doing some adaptations which are a little outside the traditional repertoire of rendering? Right?
Oh, that's great.
See, we can travel anywhere. This mic. So it's Kathak is like that. Kathak is very expansive and very natural. How we stand also. So like expression is also very free, and it can merge into any genre of music, I think. And adaptation is always nice. It's an exchange. And Kathak, since it evolved from temple tradition, and it has so many influences of different traditions, like Rasa Nartan Parampara, it has influence of that. Then it has influence of Mughal Parampara, the Persian tradition. So Kathak always has adopted different genre of music. So nowadays, even we are merging with.
If I can
yeah.
cut in, I think she was asking about some, though.
Some.
How do
yeah,
you-
I'm coming to that
Oh, okay,
point.
sure.
Yeah.
Kaz and the chalan, which
Yeah.
in traditional Kathak goes in a certain fashion.
Yeah.
And in jazz, what I understand happening that some notes come with emphasis blurts, So how do you really balance that emphasis is what
See,
my
it's
question was.
spontaneity, which is there in Kathak also. So it is not rigid. It's very free-flowing. So we respond to what the jazz is being played. So it's just responding to the rhythm, and that's the language we create, I think so. And coming on to the sum is really, it is a pran, and it gives you a different experience, really a grand experience, you can say. And coming on sum is really बहुत आनंददायी होता है. I'm sorry, I'm bad in English, but I can share in Hindi also as well. So this Western music, I have always heard that it is a linear, and the Indian is circular. So, but it's amazing to go linear also at times. But always we are in the rhythm only. It's not coming on a sum is a different aspect, and being in a rhythm is also a different aspect, and responding to each other. So Kathak always responds to the tabla plate or pakhavish plate, and so we are responding to the jazz beats as well.
Yeah, I mean, it might be interesting. We actually, the piece we rehearsed yesterday was, I mean, because I compose thinking about Indian music, the sum is more in there. We actually rehearsed a little bit of piece that goes like this. Do you hear that more in there? So that one's more, maybe more I don't want to use the word obviously, but emphatically emphasizes going to some, which, you know, which is a big aesthetic in Indian music. But within that 11 beat that we played, I mean, the sum is still, I think, pretty strong. Especially. It's just that it's a complicated rhythm because it's an 11, but we're still giving that movement into the sum. And in fact, that's how we build our T high as well. Now maybe, yeah?
Sir, how did you work on 11 beats and how about 16? You have any exploration in mind with the 16 beats?
Do I have any what?
Exploration.
Oh, many. I mean, that's, you know, that's our common thing. Yeah, so many. Do me yeah. This is one she hasn't heard, but we'll see what happens. So you can play like Teen Tao. Here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, That's like kind of a Puriya Daneshri thing that I composed. And it's some, but it's what you call like on a gut. It doesn't land on the. Sorry. So she never heard that before, and I haven't played in a while, but like I said, we speak a common language. Some is there, but more because I'm 30, 40 years, I'm kind of familiar with the Indian aesthetic. So it's something I think about. It's not something every jazz musician will think about, but the one is there. Whether you're playing funk, jazz, American folk music, I mean, pretty much every music has a one. Some of it's really hard to hear. I've listened to classical Japanese music called gagaku, or been to some traditional Japanese shamisen performances. Some of that music's really hard for me to understand, the one. You listen to some sophisticated Afro-Cuban music, the one is very much there, but they don't show it very often. So, there are elusive forms, but pretty much most of the world's music, they're aware of, if not a cycle, they're aware of a beat somewhere. Generally, not every music, but it's a pretty common thread, which is why drummers from different disciplines can often come together and jam. They can make music because they can hear what the beats are. And we can get into differences. I mean, African music is polymetric, so that things are kind of lining up vertically. Indian music tends to be horizontal, and with the great drummers from both the South and the North, can see far ahead where they're going and where their phrases can suddenly become tihais or korvais or chakadars, and Okay? Yes?
So, in your opinion, how does Carnatic music with its kriti, more kriti based, more bandish sort of based, do you think it's closer to traditional way jazz approaches, being organized around tunes?
I don't know that.
To
Well, I mean, there are certain things. I mean, it's interesting. In some ways, I think of Carnatic music as actually being more classical, and Hindustani music being a little bit more jazz-like, in that in Hindustani music there's much less composed material and much more improvisation. In Carnatic music, they have a very old tradition of composition, and very long, involved compositions. So the music maybe feels more classical in the South and possibly more jazz in the North. But that being said, often musicians trained in the Carnatic system are often more adaptable to learning Western type compositions, because they're more they have more experience learning longer compositions with shifting forms. So, I like working with musicians from both the North and the South, and each school brings, kind of a different strength to what they do. I don't know. I like my personal experience as a student of Indian music. I would say the first 20 years were probably just Hindustani music, but I'd say starting around 2000, I started working with a Western drummer named Steve Smith, and he had sort of entered the world of Indian music through Carnatic drumming. And I would say it's a much more accessible system to a Western musician also, especially the Carnatic rhythmic techniques, for a couple of reasons. One, if you're learning from a tabla player, you're learning bowls. So each syllable that they recite represents a stroke or a series of, or a combination of strokes. In the South, they're generally just counting. Taka, taka, dimi, taka, taka, ta, taka, dimi, taka, ta. And that's a little bit easier for a Westerner to grab onto the da terikita din tun kata. That's, I think it's a little more difficult to grab a hold of. And the South, once you get sort of how our Korva is structured, you can put it together pretty well. I mean, you can put the pieces together. But let's say you're listening to North Indian Peshkar, the opening section of a classical tabla recital. It's very elusive. It's very hard, and it doesn't repeat. So, you know, a little story. I had a band called Summit with Zakir Hussain and Steve Smith, both amazing drummers. And Steve had been learning at that point some of the Carnatic tradition. And the piece actually that I just played for you, which is called Frame Master, that it opens with me playing kind of like a lahara, which is the nagma, the accompanying melody to a classical tabla solo. And what I'm playing is very unusual, and it's not that easy to play with. It goes like this: 1, 2, 3. I'm not hitting the downbeat, but it's in 4/4. And on the recording, Zakir plays a very sophisticated peshkar. No, it's me. That was me, the switch. He plays a very sophisticated peshkar, and we're in the studio, and I'm paying a lot of money to record this album, and Steve's going, wait, Zakir, show me what you do, and sits down on the floor in front of Zakir, who then shows him like the first little bit of the peshkar, which takes like 20 minutes for Steve to get, and then he goes, oh great, and that repeats? And Zakir is like, no, it never repeats. And I was like, guys, I'm paying the engineer, let's get back to work. And so that's why, you know, in the South, if you get the fact that they're doing a reduction, takademi takadada, takita takadada, takita takademi da, takadada, takada, tatum. So he hears it right away, he knows what's coming, because his teacher, Suresh Talwalkar, has incorporated the Carnatic system into his understanding. So for me, I try to grab a hold of as much as I can of both, and then take my own aesthetic and bring them together.
We don't have much time.
Okay.
The amazing Charukeshi which you played yesterday. And before you wind up, I request
Well, that's what I started showing a little bit of that.
You did a little of it, but the Charukeshi in 7 beats, I think.
Yeah.
If you can do a bit of improvisation, it will be amazing.
Okay.
If it's possible.
Okay, 5, 6, 7. thank you so much for coming. Thank you. Umesh, and thank you to Umesh on percussion. And thank you to Spick McKay. Thank you for inviting me. And yeah, go to as many concerts as you can and pay for the music you listen to. So thank you so much. Thank you.
Well, before you all leave, I want to thank our artists, obviously, for coming here tonight. Mr. George Brooks, Rujuta, round of applause, please. And Umesh, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your insights into the entire jazz, Indian classical music fusion. I'm sure the audience, the music and dance enthusiasts, at least in the audience, would find it very fascinating. Also, I would request Dr. Prasad Subramaniam to come on stage to felicitate the artists on our behalf. I would also like to thank the technical team, especially Mr. Khandekar and Mr. Devpal, for handling the sound and light systems. Also, the guest house staff for all the hospitality. A special thanks also to Rujuta ji and Shudipto ji for helping us getting this event together.
Actually, I should be grateful to Sudipto ji and Nagraj ji for getting us together, and it was wonderful experience, and I don't have words to say. It was amazing experience to be with George and learn from him so many things, and thanks to you all for bringing us together. Thank you.
Many of you don't know what George is doing this week. He's spending tomorrow going to another music academy and training 30 students, spending the whole day. Sunday he's going to Hari Prasad ji's Gurukul, where he's taking around 20 budding flute players. And so much of, he's a very busy musician all over the world, but see his commitment on working endlessly with young musicians of India to give them, to demystify what is this instrument and how they can take inspiration and play their Indian music. So he took a lot in terms of learning from Prannath ji and Zakir Bhai and everything, but the way of giving back, we really appreciate George.
It's very much my pleasure. I mean, especially India, I mean, so much has been given to me from this culture, from this country, and from the musicians here, that if there's something I can offer back, I'm very, very happy to do it. So,
Thank you. And of course, thank you, audience, for showing up, sharing this evening with us. And we hope you enjoyed being here. Thank you.